CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has just concluded his state visit to China, a 5-day trip that elevated the bilateral relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership and cemented a wide range of agreements covering infrastructure, agriculture, investment and industrial capacity building. So why does President Mnangagwa choose China for his first state visit outside Africa? And how will this trip help Zimbabwe leapfrog 18 years of isolation to become a middle-income country by 2030? I'm Lindy Mtongana. Welcome to Talk Africa. Relations between China and Zimbabwe date back to the 1970s during Zimbabwe's independence struggle. The latest trip by Zimbabwe's head of state to China has been termed as a new chapter in cooperation between the two countries. Let's take a look at some of the highlights from Mnangagwa's visit.
Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa's first state visit outside of Africa came at the invitation from his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping. And his intensive itinerary spelt loud and clear that the president meant serious business. On Tuesday, he was welcomed at the Great Hall of the People. A formal state reception was held in his honor. Later, President Xi and President Mnangagwa held talks and oversaw the signing of a dozen of MOUs, exchanges of letters, and agreements that covered a wide range of areas for cooperation, such as technology transfer, agriculture, infrastructure, mining, and human resources development. On Tuesday, President Mnangagwa met Premier Li Keqiang and the chairman of the Standing Committee of China's National People's Congress, Li Zhanshu. Both sides reiterated their country's commitment towards charting a new chapter in relations. During his time in Beijing, President Mnangagwa also attended a business forum organized to brandish that Zimbabwe is now open and ready for business. Later, the president visited Anhui province, a major agricultural province in China, and the Zhejiang province, home to China's e-commerce giant Alibaba. The 5-day visit saw the elevation of China-Zimbabwe ties from all-weather friends to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Departing for Harare on Friday, President Mnangagwa cited his country's plan to achieve its Vision 2030, by which time the country aims to achieve a middle-class income status. The strengthened partnership with China within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative and FOCAC will play a key role in the achievement of that ambition.
Now, since the transition of power in November 2017, Harare has embarked on a spirited effort to re-engage the global community in diplomacy and investment into its economy. Speaking exclusively to CGTN's Tian Wei in Beijing, President Mnangagwa articulated Zimbabwe's position regarding China's role in its path to economic recovery. Let's take a listen to some excerpts from that interview.
Zimbabwe is going through a new dispensation, and there's a lot of hope and expectation in the area of economic growth and expansion. And we have come here to the People's Republic of China as our first call outside Africa to talk to our closest friend, which is the People's Republic of China, and laying bare our economic challenges we are facing at home. I'm glad to say in all areas that I have raised with my delegation, we have received positive replies to those challenges. And I'm so confident that the assistance we are going to receive from the People's Republic of China in terms of grants, in terms of loans, will see us implement the vision which we have to grow our economy as well as to deepen our economic cooperation with the People's Republic of China.
Now, economy seems to be on the top of your agenda. And that is the way to go if you look at China's road over the past 40 years, reform and opening up. But to you, Mr. President, what would be the biggest challenge at this point?
Well, let me say that the last 18 years of our history as Zimbabwe has been dominated by sanctions imposed on our country by the West. That was the dominant crippling factor in our situation. But since the new dispensation and the dawn of the new dispensation, we have said yes, we have been enjoying excellent political relations with the People's Republic of China, and to some extent cooperating with us and assisting us during those hard times. But we have said Zimbabwe is open for business. And I can assure you that the rest of the international community has indicated by giving positive green indication to cooperate with us in the area of attracting foreign direct investment into Zimbabwe. But with regard to specifically to the People's Republic of China, I'm happy that I am here. In the areas that I have raised, it could be in the area of agriculture, in the area of mining, in the area of infrastructure development, in the area of human development, in terms of skills transfer, technological transfer. I've received positive response from the People's Republic of China. To Zimbabwe, as the President of Zimbabwe, national interest comes first. There is nothing China has done that threatens the independence or national interest of Zimbabwe. So we will embrace all countries who would share with us at mutual level, and they say mutually we can cooperate. But as for China, there is not even a moment when we can think that China is a threat to our national interests. The vision of my current administration is shared by all of our people in Zimbabwe. And with that expectation and collaboration and unity, I think there is no impediment to achieve our goal to grow, to modernize, and to develop. And this is why we are saying with the abundant resources in our country and with support from external technologies and the skills, we should be able, within 10 years, by 2030, bring Zimbabwe to a level where it becomes a middle-income country.
Let's take a short break now, and when we come back, I'll be joined by our panel of experts to help us unpack the significance of President Mnangagwa's state visit to China. Stay tuned.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. I'm now joined by my expert panel of guests to help us unpack the significance of President Mnangagwa's visit to China. Professor He Wenping joins us from Beijing. She is the Director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Johannesburg, Piers Pigu, he is a senior consultant for Southern Africa at the International Crisis Group. And with me in our Nairobi studios is Professor Peter Kagwanja, the president of the Africa Policy Institute. Thank you all for joining me in this discussion. Well, of course, for his first state visit, President Mnangagwa has chosen China. It is important for us to ask the question, why China? And I'll start with you, Professor He Wenping. Some say this goes back to the historical ties between China and Zimbabwe. What do you attribute this all-weather friendship to?
Well, yes, it's not a surprising thing for me to see that the President Mnangagwa has chosen China as the first country he has been visited outside of Africa. Because China and Zimbabwe, we have been enjoying very good relations during the past decades. Ever since the Zimbabwe had already fought their liberation and national independence ever since the 1960s, 1970s. So even President Mnangagwa himself had spent his years in the 1960s in China. So these relations, especially when Zimbabwe was under the sanction from the Western countries, and China continued to engage with Zimbabwe in every kinds of aspects, economic cooperation and also political, this exchange visits, so all of that. Zimbabwe, they needs to open a new era to develop the economy, to bring back the past glory called the breadbasket in Southern Africa as a whole. So they need to develop all kinds of those aspects of their economy.
Well,
and China has those technical know-how. Yes, so we can offer those help.
And of course, this is the key thing, that Zimbabwe is entering a new dawn, as they like to call it. And I'll just come to you in Johannesburg, Piers. Some analysts suggest that right now, this is the most important visit that Mnangagwa can make. Do you agree?
Well, I think it's important to put this visit in a broader context of President Mnangagwa establishing and re-establishing a series of relationships, both within the continent and further afield, east and west. He has been on a fairly heavy travelling schedule since he was inaugurated in late November as part of a re-engagement with the West and a re-engagement more broadly with the international community. Clearly the relationship with China, as the professor has pointed out, is an extremely important one. And it's important to re-establish very clearly with the Chinese authorities what the game plan is from the president as he leads up and heads towards an election within the next few months. The Chinese authorities were uncomfortable with the difficult political situation and the concomitant economic crises in Zimbabwe over the last few years, and I think that there is a measure of relief from the Chinese authorities that there is now an opportunity to put the country back onto an even keel, particularly in terms of its economics, and that requires servicing of its debts, not just to Western financial institutions, but to China itself, to whom it owes an enormous amount of money. Several $1 billion, and which it has been servicing in a rather haphazard way at the moment. So this is an important visit. Let's not say it's anything but that, but it must be seen within a broader context where Zimbabwe is re-engaging with both West and East.
Oh, absolutely. And Professor Kagwanja, let's bring you in on that. Zimbabwe's new dawn, seeing it reaching out to the West, to East. But of course, the first few visits were on the continent. SADC leaders, the AU, most recently Abidjan for the Africa CEO Forum. What does this say about his priorities in terms of engaging with regional and continental leaders?
I think, again, putting Zimbabwe's new dawn into context, it's important to highlight that Africa is beginning to have a true perspective of its foreign policy. First, that Africa itself is a potential market for Africans. And therefore, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and other countries are looking into each other for potential markets, for potential source of material. Two, that the South-South cooperation matter, and this is where China comes in. And therefore, you can see the progression in consolidating his his aura and feel within the continent, and then moving to China. Again, we need not emphasize the fact that Mnangagwa is not actually going to China. He's returning home. You remember, he was trained there militarily in the 1960s as part of China's assistance to Zimbabwe's liberation. and two, China was there when Zimbabwe needed a helping hand when the economy was down. So it's only natural that you go to China first.
Absolutely. And Professor Ho Wen-Ping, let's go back to you in Beijing. We know, of course, that China was there for Zimbabwe when few others were. But now that Zimbabwe is open for business and investors are coming back from all over the world, do you think China is still likely to give Zimbabwe its most favorable deal compared to the likes of the IMF perhaps? And of course, as we know, the US is still extending sanctions on Zimbabwe.
Yeah, Zimbabwe now will give a lot of new policies, preferential policy especially. So they are going to do their own, like reform and opening up. So I think this is a very good thing for Zimbabwe. I don't think China now will lost our competitive advantage when Zimbabwe want to embrace with other investors. Actually, this is a good thing because China will also enjoy competitive advantage in many aspects. So I think given those competitive advantages, so China, I think we are not afraid of saying if other investors from other countries now also welcomed to Zimbabwe, and then China's those companies, they have no place in Zimbabwe. I don't think in that way. Plus, those experience, those Chinese companies, they have already accumulated in Zimbabwe. Those previous those experiences and this know-how, and they have already adapted to those local environment. They know the local culture. So those past experience also offered those competitive advantages for them.
Yes, absolutely. And let's just look a little closer at Zimbabwe's economic revival. This is a country whose economic growth slowed to just 0.7%. That was in 2016. But Mnangagwa is now saying that, he's been using this phrase, leapfrog. He wants to see Zimbabwe leapfrog into becoming a middle-income economy by 2030 and regain its status as the breadbasket of Africa. I'll start with you, Piers, in Johannesburg. Do you think this is realistic?
Well, of course, there's a lot of aspirational rhetoric on the table at the moment in a context where Zimbabwe's economy is still facing a series of fundamental structural impediments. So it's good that there are aspirations, of course, and there need to be clear trajectories and roadmaps towards achieving those aspirations. But Zimbabwe is a long, long way from being out of the woods at the moment. And we really are at the very beginning of a long, steady, hopefully steady climb towards greater sustainable economic stability and prosperity for a country which has really been one of the worst faring economies globally over the last 15 to 20 years. So yeah, it's early days. The talk is positive, and there is a positive reception from a number of quarters in the international community and on the continent itself, and to a certain extent within Zimbabwe. But it's important to remember that there is still an enormous gap between the rhetoric and the reality for the vast majority of ordinary Zimbabweans. And I think this must not be lost sight of, particularly as we head into election season, where ordinary Zimbabweans will judge whether Mr. Mnangagwa and his team are delivering and have set the country on the right course.
Indeed, that election will be the true test for Mnangagwa. But as Pierce says, a long and steady road for Zimbabwe. Just coming to you, Professor Kagwanja, he's traveled, Mnangagwa, all the way to China with 10 cabinet ministers and a delegation of 80 business executives. No clearer sign, of course, that Zimbabwe is ready to do business. Considering this long and steady journey towards reviving its economy, what are the key sectors of cooperation that have emerged from this visit to China?
Zimbabwe, first and foremost, is not an ordinary African country. It is true that it has had monumental problems in terms of its economy, and that is very well documented. But what is never documented adequately are its potential. And I think that's what China is eyeing, and that is what Zimbabwe is parading as opportunities. First, remember, Zimbabwe is an agricultural economy. It is also a powerful mineral economy, and it's a country that has had its infrastructure almost intact despite the economic upheavals that's gone through, and therefore it is keen on using its resources from minerals to do construction, particularly of infrastructure, and China is the best place to go to get support for infrastructural engineering and so on. Zimbabwe produces, one of Africa's leading gold and diamond, very rich. It's one of the leading tobacco producers in the world, fruits, and other foods. And therefore, the Chinese markets will also benefit from food from Zimbabwe, particular grains and tobacco and even grapes, so to say. And therefore, as you see Zimbabwean business people going there, I think the idea is to look for partners for all these diverse opportunities that Zimbabwe offers.
And Professor Herwin Ping, the other key element of what happened during this visit was that the countries elevated their bilateral relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership. What does this essentially mean for the future of ties between Zimbabwe and China?
I think this comprehensive strategic partnership means, because there's a comprehensive, means goes to every aspect. So not only those infrastructure, not only those telecommunication industry and agricultural one, it will cover like people-to-people exchange, and also like I think President Mnangagwa and President Xi Jinping, they all highly mentioned like One Belt, One Road, how to engage One Belt, One Road initiative with Zimbabwe's their own development strategy. So with those engagement by those two those strategies, and also like China, we're also saying we are now entering into the new era of this Chinese socialist construction with Chinese characteristics. And Zimbabwe now also mentioned that enter into a new era for the economic development. So those two new era actually share a lot of things in common.
I just want to pick up again on the question of the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, in an interview just ahead of his visit to China, Emmerson Mnangagwa said the Belt and Road Initiative is a global initiative. It's speaking to the future. It's speaking to the progress which will serve the world in the future. And it's a train which one must not miss. Professor Kagwanja, maybe the Belt and Road Initiative, it might find some sort of certainty during the FOCAC summit that's scheduled to take place in Beijing in September this year. How might Zimbabwe, under new leadership, take advantage of this platform?
I think we have stated this before, that FOCAC is perhaps one of the best things that have happened to African economies. And when you look at the growth of African economies from 2010, from what used to be called the forgotten or lost continent to now an Africa rising, that is directly attributable to the partnership between China and Africa within the framework of FOCAC. And therefore, when we come to FOCAC 2018 and Zimbabwe, the key question is moving Johannesburg forward. In other words, the commitments that were made in Johannesburg, which meant linking Africa closer to the Belt and Road Initiative, and to enhance industrialization of the continent as key, and thirdly, extension of infrastructure within the continent. And Zimbabwe is keen on infrastructure. It has in the past been an industrial, an upcoming industrial country. I think it would like to reboot its industries, and that is important. And finally, how it is going to be linked to the Belt and Road Initiative as a landlocked country is going to be key. And therefore, Zimbabwe is looking forward, I imagine, to participating in FOCAC in order to put its priorities forward.
Well, indeed, it's going to be, Zimbabwe's choice to make how they engage and with whom they engage going forward. And just as a matter of concluding, wherever we've seen Mnangagwa, whether he's in Davos or whether he's in Beijing, he's always wearing his signature scarf with the Zimbabwean flag. Certainly a spirit of positivity, a spirit of really focusing on a sense of pride and nationalism for Zimbabweans. How then do you think China's visit, this visit to China really has set the tone for Zimbabwe's new dawn? That's a question I'll ask to each of you. Perhaps we can start with you, Piers, in Johannesburg.
Well, I mean, President Mnangagwa is working very hard to present an image of a leader who is setting Zimbabwe on a new course. The elections later this year are going to be a central part in him establishing greater domestic and international legitimacy. The international community, to a large extent, and this is both East and West, have given Mr. Mnangagwa essentially a free pass. But I think that there is a forward-looking agenda, and that's what Mr. Mnangagwa is trying to put on the table. Yes. That is what China is embracing. And in fact, notwithstanding the sanctions issue around the US, I think there is a greater meeting of minds within the international community towards Zimbabwe at the moment. And that's an opportunity that Mr. Mnangagwa and his administration are evidently trying to grab.
Absolutely. We'll have to leave it there. We are almost out of time. If there is just a moment, Professor He Wenping, just a final very quick comment on how this visit to China has set the tone for Zimbabwe's new dawn.
Yeah, I think this visit is very important, not only for Zimbabwe and also for China. We all know in the coming September, China will host the China-African Summit. So with this summit, I think we have already invited and welcomed the 3 African presidents. One by one, starts from Cameroon president, and also then followed by Namibia president, and now Zimbabwe president. So which means this, we can call it African year now in China in this 2018. So which is very good for pushing China and Africa closer and work together again and continue to develop our brilliant new chapter.
Thank you so much, Professor He Wenping. And finally, Professor Kagwanja, your thoughts on Zimbabwe's new dawn?
I think the concept an all-weather friend in reference to China in regard to its relationship with Africa need to be emphasized. That China is not a friend because there are minerals or there's this world. There's a friend because it's a friend in Africa. That need to be emphasized. And Zimbabwe is a good example of that. And as Zimbabwe tries to emerge from the kind of economic hardship it has had, I think China's benevolence is going to play a major role.
Thank you.
It is not the stringencies of whether it is transparent, accountable, which is going to play, but it's the change of our friendship.
Apologies, we have to leave it there, Professor, but thank you so much. And thank you to all my guests for their insights. In Beijing, Professor He Wenping, the Director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Johannesburg, Piers Pigu, Senior Consultant for Southern Africa at the International Crisis Group. And with me in Nairobi, Professor Peter Kagwanja, the President of the Africa Policy Institute. Now remember to join the conversation online through Facebook, YouTube and our Twitter handle. And do tune in again next week for more insights on Talk Africa. I'm Lindy Mtongana. Goodbye.